All righty, 1 o'clock. Time to get started again, guys. Let me moderate conversation. Let's finish up our conversation in the chapter, and then let's go on and do chapter 13. So we're talking about evictions and constructive and actual eviction when the tenant is evicted. Causes for eviction we went over. Now, here's we're switching gears. I'm going to talk about different types of leases. Number one, there could be a gross lease, and a gross lease is typically a residential apartment type lease where the tenant pays a base fee to the landlord. Maybe they pay utilities, but that's it. There's no other charges. They pay the landlord. The landlord takes whatever rent they get from the tenant and pays all their bills from that. A net lease is typically a commercial lease where the tenant pays a base rent and then a percentage or all of the associated charges for the property for the time they're there. In other words, they're paying a base rent to the landlord, and then a net lease would also include some, if not all, of the expenses on a monthly basis. So maintenance, taxes, insurance, salaries for individuals working the properties, those would be paid in addition to the base rent to the landlord. Now, there's net, double net, and triple net. Net is where the tenant pays a base rent plus a couple of the expenses. Double net is where they pay a base rent and the majority of expenses. And triple net is where they pay the basic rent plus all of the associated monthly expenses of the property. Again, a gross lease, typically a residential lease where they pay one fee to the landlord and that's it. Maybe utilities on top. A net lease is where they pay a base rent to the landlord and a percent or all of the other associated charges in the property. Another type of lease would be a percentage lease, a retail type operation, maybe Macy's, something like that, where Macy's may pay the owner of the mall they're in a base rent and a percentage of income sales over a certain dollar amount. So let's take Macy's, and maybe it's here in Paramus, New Jersey. They pay, let's say, because I don't know the numbers, they pay $100,000 a month in base rent. And a percent, let's say 4% of anything over $1 million in sales per month. Therefore, if Macy's has a typical month and sells $1.2 million, then the landlord would get $100,000 base rent and 4% of anything over $1 million, which was 200,000. So they get 4% of 200,000, or roughly what's that? $8,000 extra. So they're getting a $100,000 base rent, and then 4% of the overage of $1 million of 200,000. 4% would be 8,000. They get $108,000 of rent for the month. That would be an example of a percentage lease. And there are other types of leases, variable leases where the rental rate changes over time due to some thing or time frame expiring or some index changing. There's ground leases where the tenant usually just rents the ground for an extended period of time, 49, 99 years. There's various reasons why people would do that. And then there are oil and gas leases where the landlord can rent out to a company the minerals, gas, oil that's in the ground that he owns and make profit from those rental incomes. So again, real quick, gross lease, typically a residential lease. Net lease, typically a commercial lease. Percentage lease, typically a retail setting type of operation lease. And other types, variable leases, ground leases, oil leases. Now, variable leases, once again, change over time. Either they have escalator or elevator clauses or some sort of adjustment periods that include rates of increase at a predetermined time. So let's say you have a 4-year lease and your base rent for the first year is $1,000. And then for the second year would be $1,250 a month. The third year, $1,500, and the fourth year, $1,750. It would have built-in escalator movements in the rate of the rent payment. So it varies over time. A ground lease, typically just the ground. So who would rent such a thing? Maybe I'm a corporate wannabe. Maybe I'm a .com wannabe. And I have enough angel and investor money to rent a piece of property to build my corporate office park on, but I can't buy it because I don't have that much money. And as I start to make profit, I can build my C-level executive suites so we can enjoy plush surroundings. We can then, when profit is made, create a sales and marketing department, add that onto the structure, another building is added. Then a manufacturing and development, or research and development with manufacturing facilities, another big addition to the complex. Shipping, receiving facilities, and you see how this could grow over time. And all I did was rent ground for a period of time. But if I'm just renting the ground, that means I have to know what my improvement rights are with the landlord. If he grants me improvement rights, then anything I do to the property is an improvement, I would be allowed under the lease. But the lease must also specify what happens to those improvements when the lease terminates. Do those improvements go back to the landlord when the lease terminates, or are they mine to take with me when I leave? So understand, a ground lease, typically a long-term lease for the ground only, would have to specify if the tenant has improvement rights or not. And then I said there's oil and gas leases where the landlord charges a company to access the minerals or gas or oil in the ground and pays a fee for using those minerals, gas, or oil in the ground. Was there any questions about these different types of leases before I move on? Excuse me. Okay, not seeing any questions. I'm going to move on. Property management. This is the last topic we're going to talk about before we finish the chapter. Property management is a growing industry here in New Jersey. There's an increase in demand for property managers because of the more investor-owned properties that there are in the state. They're an important part of the real estate segment in that they are hired to maintain, operate properties for owners. A property manager is a very diverse type of person. They can handle many, many, many different areas of responsibility, and in fact do. Let's think what a property manager may do. First of all, they have to advertise and market the property to attract tenants. They have to do market research to determine what rents to charge, what would be appropriate for this building to charge as rent. And then when they do attract tenants, they have to screen them, right? Do background checks, check previous landlords and employers, run credit checks, and if they're deemed necessary or they're deemed appropriate, have them sign leases, then do a check-in procedure. When they leave, do a check-out procedure, handle income, the rents, collect monies, security deposits, security accounts, returning those or making adjustments if there's damages. Then there's maintenance that they may perform, different types of maintenance. There's paying the bills. They got to do that too. Then they got to make sure the tenants are happy, so they got to interface with the tenants. And there's all kinds of responsibilities that a property manager must do, including reporting to the owners. Reports include things like monthly income and expense reports, or excuse me, what are commonly termed as operating statements every month. An operating statement lists the income and expenses that the property has received for the month and gives a printed record of what the financial condition is of that property for that month. Property manager should run these reports at least once every month, and then maybe a quarterly report, and if necessary, do quarter-to-quarter comparisons. Then a year-end report showing trending and other issues that the manager would show, so that they can inform the seller of certain situations that are currently on the property and or are developing on the property over time. So they're going to have to do many, many different things. So a property manager's job is dictated by his management agreement with the owner of property. Who does what, Mr. Owner? Under what conditions do you want me to handle things? What conditions are you going to handle? Do I have any spending authority? If so, how much? Or do I have to contact you to spend every dollar? Will you allow me to keep the books, pay monies, create budgets, establish reserve accounts? All these things have to be determined in the property management agreement. Excuse me. And because the property manager is acting as an agent for the property owner, then they're going to have agency responsibilities. Now, there is a licensing requirement here. And the licensing requirement is this: if you are a direct employee of the building owner and you're hired to manage the property, then you do not need a real estate license. However, if you're not an employee of the building owner, you're hired to manage the property, then you must have a New Jersey real estate license. You must be working for a broker who authorizes you to do property management. Those are the licensing requirements. And as an agent for the owner, you have certain fiduciary obligations. These are the responsibilities. We actually went over these last week, if you recall, in Chapter 3, Agency, Brokerage, and Ethical Consideration, where we explain what the duties of the agent are. You have the duty of disclosure or notice, in this case, as a property manager, to disclose the conditions, report truthfully on all conditions surrounding your property at all times to all parties. You have the right, you have the obligation to notice your tenants of changes or if something that needs to be cleared up. You have a duty of obedience to your client, the owner of property, to operate it for a profit and to save money where you can. The duty of care: you must know how to manage property in order to do it correctly, to exercise the duty of care. If you don't, you can bring financial ruin to your client. You have a duty of accounting for monies received, rent, security deposits, safekeeping of those funds. And you have a duty of loyalty to keep whatever confidential information the landlord wants kept confidential, confidential. So there are certain agency responsibilities of the property manager they have to the client when managing properties. Was there any questions about what these things are? If the property manager does not have a license because he is employed by the owner, is he still an agent with these? No, because they're an employee then. That would be a situation where you're just doing what the boss tells you to do. But as a salesperson hired by them with a license and you're not an employee, then you do have agency responsibilities. All right, no other questions, let's move on. There are certain property management concerns that every property manager should be aware of, and that's budgeting expenses. Many of you guys operate household budgets. Why? So you don't overspend what you bring in as income. And if you're doing that, why have a budget? So budgets track operating expenses and capital expenditures over time so we can track. How are these things affecting the bottom dollar of cash flow, return on investment to the owner? Should we budget these things through certain capital expenditure accounts, or just pay from its cash as they occur from the owner's pocket? Renting properties, setting rental rates, tenant selections, collecting rents, we already talked about, but these are main responsibilities of that property manager. And then maintaining the property, maintenance issues, hiring personnel versus hiring contractors. What's better, depending on the application? Making sure insurance coverage is paid and that the proper insurances are on that property. And if someone wants to follow through on getting advanced certifications in property management, the desirable management certificate to have is called the Certified Property Manager, CPM. And that's given by the Institute for Real Estate Management, or IREM. You can find all the information. It usually costs somewhere between $8,500 and $10,000 for this certification. It takes about 2 years. It's like an associate's degree at a college. You have to pass tests and prove proficiencies. But if you obtain the CPM designation from the Institute of Real Estate Management, you're in a position to be hired by some of the top-notch companies in the United States that will pay you 6 figures or more to manage their properties. So yes, there are future careers for those wishing to get into property management by following the property management designation courses, the certified property management course specifically at the Institute for Real Estate Management. There's also a trade industry called the Building Owners and Managers Association, just like the National Association of Realtors is for real estate agents. BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association, is one of those trade groups for building managers and owners. There's a Community Associations Institute. There's various types of institutes or associations you can avail yourself if you want to advance in the business. So we have finished our chapter presentation for this section. Does anybody have any follow-up questions before I pull up the review questions for the chapter 14? 12 rather, chapter 12. Not seeing any good, then I'm going to moderate the conversation and we'll do the poll questions and just hit next to advance. Number one, if you would please kindly answer these questions. A residential lease must contain notice of the right to attorney review if it excuse me. A residential lease must contain notice of the right to attorney review if it Okay, so let's see. About a half of the class is answering the questions. I don't know what the other half is doing, but since half of you did take the time to respond, thank you. So those who did respond, 2 out of 3 of you are correct. 67% got D correct. It's for a period of 1 year or more. Number 2, a lead-based paint disclosure statement must be included in the lease for any and from those who did respond, about 83% of you are correct, answering C, residential building constructed before 1978. That is correct. Good job. Number 3, a lease is considered to be excuse me. And from those responding, a lease is considered to be 30% of you are correct, answering B, personal property. A lease conveys rights to property. It's a piece of paper. It's personal property. Number 4, a woman agrees to rent her upstairs apartment to a friend for only the next 6 months. The friend has a The friend has what 42% of you got wrong, and 27% of you did get correct, is A, an estate for years. 6 months has a beginning and a definite ending date. The end of 6 months ends the lease. It's an estate for years by definition. Number 5. The owner agrees to rent his upstairs apartment, which is subject to rent control, to a friend for month to month. To end the arrangement, the owner must Okay, more folks participating. Thank you. And 75% of you are correct answering C, give at least 1 month's notice before the day the rent is due. Correct, they're month to month or periodic. Number 6, the tenant's lease has expired. The tenant has neither vacated nor negotiated a renewal lease, and the landlord has declared that she does not want the tenant to remain in the building. This tenancy is called and a good 78% of you are correct answering D for dog, tenancy at sufferance. That's right, lowest recognized interest in real property. Number 7, the owner sells her 6-unit apartment building in Trenton to a buyer. All tenants have leases and have paid security deposits. Now, a good 90% of you are correct in answering D. The original owner must turn over the security deposits to the new owner is correct. D for dog. Number 8, a lease properly acknowledged may be recorded if it is for a period of more than. If I didn't go over it, it's in the text and you should be aware of it. Boy, excuse me. A lease properly acknowledged may be recorded if it's for a period of more than. The answer of which about 29% of you are correct is B for boy, 2 years. 2 years minimally. Number 9, the prospective tenant is entitled to an attorney review of a residential lease that runs for as short a term as. excuse me. The prospective tenant is entitled to an attorney review of a residential lease that runs for a shorter term as 62% of you are correct, answering C, 1 year. Number 10, a tenant who transfers the entire remaining term of his or her lease to a third party is oh boy, excuse me. And 51% of you are correct, answering B, assigning the lease is correct. B. Number 11, apartment lease agreement states that it expires on April 30th, 2022. When must the landlord give notice that the tenancy is to end? Oh, excuse me, boy, I got the yawns. I don't know why. And from those responding, about 51% of you answered correctly that D, no notice is required. State for years, ending date, 0 notice requirement. Number 12, if a tenant falls 3 months behind in rent payments, a landlord may if a tenant falls 3 months behind in rent payments, a landlord may start a court suit of possession. 93% of you had that correct. Well done. All right. Let's see. Number 13, even when there is a lease, if a landlord turned the heat down to 55 degrees, the tenant may move out and stop paying rent because of, that start should be stop. Excuse me. A property manager, I'm sorry, we're still on 13. Even when there is a lease, if a landlord turned the heat down to 55 degrees, the tenant may move out and stop paying rent because of, and 74% of those respondents answered correctly B, constructive eviction. That is correct. 14, a property manager may be reimbursed with excuse me. A property manager may be reimbursed with And 67% of you are correct, answering A percentage of rental income. Yes, A. Number 15, in New Jersey, rent security deposit outstanding. 94% have gotten this one right. A must be placed in an interest-bearing account. That is correct. Number 16. After a landlord has properly placed the tenant security deposit in a bank account, then what? And from responses received, 85% of those responding answered correctly A, and annual interest earned must be credited to the tenant. To the tenant. That is correct. 17. An owner wants to sell a rental residential property that is currently under lease for another 16 months. Regarding the security deposits made by the current tenants, the seller 85% answered correctly. C, must deliver the deposit to the purchaser and notify the tenants. Correct. C. Number 18. A tenant signed an apartment lease calling for $1,000 rent per month. According to New Jersey law, the landlord may also require a maximum security deposit of 88% of you got it correct. D for dog, $1,500 or 1.5 times the monthly rent. Yes. Excuse me. Number 19. A woman owns a 24-unit apartment building. The building is managed by a professional management company and the superintendent lives on the premises. As the landlord, the woman is responsible for furnishing certain information to each of her tenants. Which of the following is not her responsibility to provide? And from responses, 60% of you are correct answering D, the name of the local inspector and health official. No, you don't have to provide that information. It's up to the tenant's resources if they want to get that. Number 20, a gross lease is most likely to be used for rental of and 79% of you answered correctly, an apartment. I said a gross lease is typically a residential apartment type lease, so A would be correct. Number 21, with a triple net lease, the tenant pays and 57% of you are correct answering D, everything but the mortgage. Yeah. Number 22, a percentage lease provides a and from those responding, about 80%, I'll say, got it correct. C, a definite monthly rent, plus a percentage of the tenant's gross receipts in excess of a certain amount. Number 23, a ground lease is usually a ground lease is usually and about 84% of you are correct answering C, long term. That is correct. Number 24, in the absence of rent regulations, the amount of rent charge is determined by the In the absence of rent regulations, the amount of rent charged is determined by the principle of supply and demand. 73% of you are correct answering B. And for the last question, the initials CPM stand for excellent. 97% of you are correct answering C, certified property manager. All right, good retention and good comprehension on that chapter, guys. Does anybody have any final follow-up thoughts or questions before we move on to chapter